affirming without having to offer a whole lot of specifics. And yet what impressed me as we continued talking, and as I shared conversations with other people, was how many specifics there are to back up a statement like that when it comes to Capanola. Make no mistake, she lived a fine life. She grew up here in Surry County and worked diligently at Spencer's Industries and then at Blackman's Nursery. She loved devotedly her husband Hunter and her son Timothy and daughter Sheila and her granddaughters Casey and Sarah and her great-granddaughter. And as we've already mentioned, she served faithfully at Calvary Church. But what I think is more important than the fact that Capanola did those things is the spirit with which she did those things. For example, she lived with kindness. Like the Apostle Paul said in those verses that I just read to you, she let her gentleness be evident to all. We're fortunate, I think, to have several members at Calvary who grew up in the Toast community and who lived near Capanola over the years. And several of them talked about the way that she was quiet and didn't speak out all that much or pry into other people's business. And yet, she was always willing to help out. She was one of that faithful crew who used to put together meals and deliver them to families when a loved one passed away. Betty Sue Johnson mentioned the way that Capanola would take her mother, Rachel, out to the store or out for drives when Rachel wasn't able to use her car anymore. And Janice Newman talked about the way that Cap would had a special love for children. During the years that they worked together at Blackman's Nursery and taught together in the nursery at church, Capanola always found a special delight, I'm told, in being around the youngest little ones and caring for their needs. Of course, along with that, I think we need to highlight Capanola's dependability. Janice also mentioned, you see, that in the years they worked together, she was never late. She always arrived early. She was always ready to do her work. Now, I really have no way to verify this, but one friend told me that there was a secret to Capanola's punctuality. Reportedly, she used to put an alarm clock in the kitchen sink when she went to bed. And this wasn't one of those electric clocks that made a soft little beep when it went off. This was a good old-fashioned wind-up clock that rang with a clanging bell. So you can imagine the kind of racket that it must have made when it went off in the morning. However, by the time she got up to turn it off, she was awake. And so it must have worked. Of course, maybe more than any of those things, I think we need to celebrate Capanola's joy. Like the Apostle Paul said in that passage that I mentioned, she had learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. And that seemed particularly clear in the years that she spent at Central Continuing Care. Now, obviously, in that kind of environment, it can be somewhat understandable for a person to get discouraged and maybe even complain about the situation in which they find themselves. But that's not the way that Capanola responded. Instead, as several friends like Grace Shelton and others told me, she'd always talk about how she was feeling better and about the way that everyone was so good to her. And I get the impression that that was typical not only of those last years at Central Continuing Care, but really of the way that she lived her entire life. And that says a lot to me, if you stop and think about it, especially when we remember that Cap kept that spirit even though she faced some real challenges in life. I'm told that her mother passed away when she was young, and she was raised by an aunt. Her daughter Sheila died of cancer, which is the kind of deep loss that only those who have been there can fully understand. And then, of course, there was the death of her husband, Hunter, and the stroke that put her in the nursing home. So how does a person who's encountered so many heartaches maintain such a positive spirit? Well, like the Apostle Paul said, Capanola knew the secret of contentment. She knew that she could do all things through Christ who gave her strength. That, I think, is why she was such a faithful member of Calvary Baptist. That's why she had Tim and Sheila and Casey at church just about every time the doors were open. And that's why even at Central Continuing Care, she always went to Bible studies and turned out for gospel singings and went up and down the hall to see how people were doing. And that's why, even in her final days, her love for Christ was still on her mind. Gray has told me that in many of the visits he shared with Capanola, she'd talk about how she looked forward to coming back to Calvary once she felt a little bit better. And she'd ask about certain friends, many of whom had long since passed away, and she'd talk about the way that she would really love to see them again. And I'd like us to consider today that she is seeing them again. Today she's been reunited with Hunter and Sheila and with all those friends who went before her. Today she's got her strength and she's got her mind and she's experiencing in a complete way what we can only know in part while we're here. She's experiencing the peace and the love and the glory of God. And I want to rush to say that I think she's experiencing those things not so much because she was gentle and dependable and content with her life, as admirable as all those things are. No, she's experiencing those things because of grace. Because she trusted that in the end, God could hold on to her life a whole lot better than she could. And if there's good news for us today, it's that we can trust that too. We can hold on to grace just like Capanola did. And I suspect that the impact it has on us will be very similar to the impact that it had on her. We'll find that it gives us a spirit of kindness that comes from the kindness we've received, and a spirit of peace that comes from having our minds set on the right things, and a spirit of joy that comes from knowing the Lord is my shepherd, and because of that, I have everything that I need. Capanola